We're ready to start the afternoon session of our TOW meeting, and we're happy to have Director Nesbitt back and his team. So we'll just go ahead and turn the time over to you.
Hey, thank you, Madam Chair. And one thing I neglected to do this morning was to introduce Deputy Director Eric Wiltanger, sitting to my right. Eric is our fairly new, since February, Deputy Director for Internal Operations. He replaced John Kennedy, who retired. And so one of the things that's squarely in Eric's wheelhouse is all things budget and finance for the department. So he, as long as our CFO Meredith Wood, will be here through the interim to help us be on the Game and Fish team and help us through these discussions. So I think next what we've got is a discussion on a bill draft that has been contemplated before by the committee. It's a consequence of a recommendation that came from the Wildlife Task Force. I am looking outside, and I did want to note for everybody that now Representative Burkhart, all of the green trucks will look clean and there won't be any mud on them anymore. So,
Madam Chairwoman.
Yes, Representative.
But I did notice that your own personal vehicle was dirtier than some of the ones in those.
Anyway, Madam Chair, so I thought what I'd do is just give some quick background. We have Dr. Schaefer, who was on the Wildlife Task Force online. He was instrumental in providing a lot of the analysis and the input on this idea when it was discussed at the task force. I will note too, we have another member of the Wildlife Task Force in the room, local county commissioner Lee Livingston is here in the room too. And he certainly was well versed and involved in this issue, and could be helpful potentially if we've got some questions on what came from this bill. But essentially, I'll just provide a brief overview and turn it over to Dr. Schaefer. This bill looked to address a long-term pattern and problem with the existing preference point system. And granted, there are some that would argue there's nothing wrong with the current preference point system, but one of the things that certainly was important to the group was the fact that the average, because of our point system and the fact that there's a lot of people in the pool now, that the average age of the bighorn sheep and the moose hunter is getting older and older and older. And that's because it takes so many points to draw on some of these hard to draw areas. I think had we known in 1996 where we would end up with the preference point system, I think we might have gone a different direction. But the task force heard a lot of public comment, engaged the public across the state. As a reminder, it was an 18-person group made up of legislators, leaders from many different organizations, non-governmental organizations, a really good, productive group that that developed 17 recommendations and forwarded them to the legislature, the governor, and the Game and Fish Commission. So essentially what this bill and this idea attempts to address is what's commonly referred to as point creep, where as a system, a preference point system stays in place for a long time, it becomes ineffective at achieving what it was originally intended to achieve. For those folks that have a lot of preference points, they probably think the system's great. For those folks that are 20 years old and have 8 points, they might have a different opinion. And so this really attempts to change the system to still allow those folks with a higher number of points to have an advantage, but to spread the draw out a little bit more evenly across all ages. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Schaefer, and then I can certainly come back in and help before we go line by line through the bill.
Welcome, Dr. Schaefer. Glad to hear from you.
Yeah, good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Joe Schaefer. My day job, I work for Laramie County Community College and had the good fortune of being one of the many members of the Wildlife Task Force that tried to dig into some of these issues that we're incredibly passionate about. As the good director said, we spent quite a bit of time on this. I provided you with a memorandum that covers most of the salient points, and I'll maybe walk through aspects of that. Before I do, I just want to go on the record and be clear that I'm not here speaking on behalf of the task force, just simply as a member of the task force. And while I've tried to do my best to keep my own bias and interests out of these things, one of the things we learned in this work was just how incredibly passionate everybody in Wyoming is about their wildlife, about hunting and fishing, and I have some of that passion as well. Madam Chair, members of the committee, I started off the memorandum just by giving us a sort of a level set of the different point systems. I think the committee is well versed in those, so unless you want me to, I won't go into them. But I do note that oftentimes we get hung up on hearing the word points and assume that all points are created equal, and they're simply not. So preference point systems versus bonus point systems versus, purely random systems are all different and nuanced. And I tried to kind of highlight the pros and cons of each system, and then just hit on the fact that our current system for bighorn, ram, sheep, and bull moose is a hybrid system of sort, with 75% of the permits going in a preference point draw and 25% going in a random draw. And so I'm happy to answer any questions about those, but for sake of time, I'll move on to what the director sort of referenced. As we looked at this, our primary problem that we were trying to address was recognizing that the current preference point system for bull moose and ram bighorn sheep was just not tenable for the future because of the low numbers of permits that we offer and an increasingly high demand for those permits, which was making it more and more problematic for a person to expect that they would draw one of these tags within their lifetime. The foundational sort of tenet of a preference point system is that eventually you will be one of the top point holders, and eventually you will be guaranteed a tag. And because of the demand and the supply issues, we can no longer guarantee that within a person's hunting lifespan. And so we sort of honed in on that as the big problem that we had to try to address when we were looking at this system. Now, I shared this, and I think I've shared this with the committee in the past. We had to sort of balance two issues and make sure we discuss them separately. There's the issue of scarcity, the number of animals that we have on the ground right now. There's work that we're doing, that the department's doing, that we need to continue to do to try to put more animals on the ground, whether that's habitat, whether that's predator management. We all would like to see more of those animals on the ground. But the task force recognized that other than, making some bold recommendations like funding of the Wildlife Trust Fund, there was really little we could do to change the scarcity aspect. So we shifted most of our focus into talking about how do we create a system that is most equitable. In other words, the most equitable way for us to distribute those precious tags, those limited resources, to the numerous individuals who are applying. And that's really where we focused on when we started talking about what would we do differently with the system to create the most equity in the process. And so there were really three things that we wanted kind of to ensure as we went into the design of a new system. So maybe call these requirements or sort of the criteria of a system. First, the committee felt that we wanted to ensure that every applicant, even those in their very first year of applying, had the opportunity to draw a permit. We wanted people to continue to want to pursue these big game, want to engage in the process, want to do that. And the more we realized that if we were telling folks they likely would never draw within their hunting lifespan, the less likely they were to actually apply. So we wanted to ensure every applicant, even in their first year, had the opportunity to draw a permit. We wanted to provide some advantage for those applicants who loyally apply for moose and sheep permits year after year without drawing. And I would say that our interest in doing that was really weighted by the very last piece we were trying to reconcile, which was really honoring the significant investment that current applicants have made to accrue the points that they currently have. We have folks, residents and non-residents alike, who have amassed, 16, 18, 20 some points that have a financial investment as well as a time investment into those. And simply doing away with those would be problematic. And so we wanted to make sure we recognize that significant investment. Madam Chair, members of the committee, we spent some time, actually quite a bit of time, doing a vast majority of statistical modeling to try to determine the probabilities that somebody would draw. And we looked at gosh, I don't know, Director, we looked at everything, it seems like, for going to a 50-50 split, a 25-50 split, to look at probabilities, going to a pure random, going to weighted random, phasing out points. We did all kinds of probability modeling to try to figure out what was feasible for us to approach. When we dug into the phasing out, because that was one of the things we said, well, let's just phase out of the points. We'll stop issuing points today and phase out of that. When we ran the modeling based on the number of applicants with points, the number of animals that we had, we were talking, depending on the species, from 50 to 90 years to phase out a preference point system. And then we also recognize just the complexity with trying to run two systems in tandem. So then we just focused on, okay, so what are the systems that probably hit our three criteria, our three requirements, and would present the largest or the best probability of somebody drawing. And that's where we ultimately landed on a bonus point draw. A bonus point draw is a weighted random draw that would be weighted in a way that I'll talk about here in a second. It presents the best lifetime probabilities for applicants in general of drawing, although I think, to give you an example, I want to say the probability of drawing a sheep tag in your lifetime, even under this, was like 14%. So the odds aren't good, is why that scarcity piece is so important. Here's probably where I would imagine some of your questions and conversation will come in. When we looked at the modeling, we recognized that there's really kind of three distinct groups of individuals that are currently invested in the process of applying. There are those that we would call sort of top point holders. Those are the individuals who have amassed enough points that they could arguably, should they apply for a permit today, draw a permit in the preference point pool. Now, not necessarily the exact permit they want. We have a handful of them, like Unit 12 for sheep, I think it is, that is just high demand, and it may take longer there. But those individuals at the top points could apply and get a permit in the current preference point structure if they chose to do so. Then there's this larger group, I would say, and they're kind of the folks that I might say are in the no man land. For moose, that's somewhere between 14 and 18 points. For sheep, it's a little bit higher. So these are individuals who arguably could, if we kept the preference point system and they had enough years left in their hunting lifespan, could eventually draw within the preference point model. Most likely. Now, that's predicated that they have many years left to apply, and that, maybe we see some of the demand increase. There's a lot of behavioral things that also go into that. But this is kind of the group that's in the catch-22 position. And then there was this third group that really was this large sort of incoming group of applicants. So there's a large number of folks with fewer than, say, 12 preference points that are in the system that arguably, unless we have significant mortality and pullout or withdrawal of applicants, arguably would not draw within their hunting lifespan based on the limited supply. So we kind of looked at those three groups and tailored our recommendations based on that. So for the first group of applicants, knowing that there are folks that could apply and draw in the current preference point model, we recommended delaying the implementation of the bill. And the director might have to help me out here. I can't remember. I think we talked somewhere between 3 and 5 years, and actually looked at the number of permits, the number of applicants that were in those top point pools to get to a sense where we'd say, you may pass the legislation, but we'll delay implementation, which gives these individuals the next few years to apply and hopefully draw underneath the preference point model. So that's how we tried to address that first group of applicants. The second group of applicants, what we recommended was moving to a weighted bonus point system. So versus a pure random draw, what a weighted bonus point system is, it takes bonus points that you would have, and gives you an extra entry into the draw, but we weight that by squaring those. And the reason we do that is to spread the applicants, but also give greater numbers of entries into the draw for those folks with more points, thereby advantaging them significantly more. Now I'll put this, and I think I put it in my memo as a disclaimer, This advantages those sort of mid-tier applicants by weighting their bonus points and giving them more entries into the draw. But a fundamental difference here is it does not guarantee that they will draw like a preference point model would. So this is the group that could, if they could stay in the application process long enough, feasibly draw under the current system. Once you move to this new system, there is no guarantee that they will draw, even though their probability of drawing is higher than those below them because of the weighted model. So that was the second group. And then the third group was this large group of folks with a handful of points. What do we do to really help them? And that's where we believe that the bonus point system, which is essentially a weighted random draw, still gives every individual the opportunity to draw a tag. And you know, odds aside, probability aside, you implement a model like this, we almost guarantee you there will be somebody who will draw a permit in their first or second year with little or no points. And so that's really how we tried to design the recommendation by looking at those three distinct groups, and really was a place to start from. And so in summary, I'll just hit on those last points in my memorandum, Madam Chair, and then would love to hear the comments or questions that you might have. We sort of believe that we can no longer guarantee everyone will eventually get a permit. And this is especially true for non-residents with the split of only 10% of the permits going to them. We knew that phasing out preference points was going to just take too much time and would be too complicated for the department to run multiple systems over that time. We know people have a lot of preference points already invested. We didn't feel right about just taking those away. We wanted to find a way to use those. And we recognize that they're also a significant revenue source for the department. And so when we did the modeling, we looked at and figured and saw that the probability in a weighted bonus point systems were probably the best of the worst, odds for drawing. And then we believe that delaying implementation slightly would help those top point holders and give them a chance to sort of finish their application process. So with that, Madam Chair, I know I covered a lot there. I'm happy to dig into any aspects that we can. Commissioner Livingston is there. He's a great resource, as is Director Nesvik and his staff, but would love to answer any questions that you might have.
Questions from the committee? Go ahead, Representative Western.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Dr. Schaefer, I know obviously we're not on the same side of this particular issue in terms of this specific bill, but I guess first I want to start off by just thanking you, because I know you did put in a ton of time on this topic. I know you're deeply passionate about it, and I really do appreciate a lot of the effort that you put in, certainly your time on the task force and being here today. My question is this: with the bill that as it was written last year, the big sticking point, I think, and one of the issues was that in some cohorts, preference point cohorts at the time of conversion would be especially vulnerable, or I guess be acutely negatively impacted by that conversion. And it's those folks who are the highest preference point holders at the time of conversion. And then there's a pretty large cohort. I think we'd have to go back and have the department maybe pull the numbers, but it was quite a bit. I think it was near 1,000. And so my question is, in the last year or so, have you been able to kind of think on that? And is there any ideas that you may have to ensure that those folks don't, I figure out how to make sure I phrase this in a way we can say it in committee, they don't get the short end of the deal in an exceptionally bad way?
Dr. Schaefer?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, Representative Western. I've given that some thought, certainly since we've had some conversations about that. There is that large group. I don't know that there's a perfect answer for that group. That, for the most part, what Representative Western is talking about is that middle group of folks. But really, at any point in time when you flip the switch and preference points are no longer in play, there will be a group that will have the most points that will no longer be guaranteed a permit. As I said, their likelihood of drawing will be higher because of the weighting of the system, but they will no longer be guaranteed to do that. And depending on where you want to draw the line in that, for those specific groups, it could be up to towards 1,000 applicants with that. There's really, I don't know that I have a recommendation or a way to provide greater incentive or preference for those individuals. Again, you could delay implementation 10 years if you wanted to. and say, we're gonna hope that we can get as many of those out as you can, but over 10 years, somebody with 10 points today will end up with 20 points. They will likely not draw. And once it converts, you're gonna have the same fundamental issue. So I think in many ways, there's gonna be the pain of ripping off the Band-Aid to a certain group of applicants, no matter what you do with this system, or we do nothing. And just know that you have a lot of folks that are entering and buying points that we no longer can guarantee will draw that tag.
Follow up? No? Any other questions? No? Go ahead, Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good to see you, Dr. Schaefer. It's been a long time since I've seen you, like what, 4 days?
4 days.
Just a quick question. I didn't have a chance to listen to the task force, but I'm curious if there was any discussion about completely discarding with preference points or the bonus point system and going to a random system entirely and making it just, for example, Moose once in a lifetime with a phase-in period of say 5 or 10 years. So those with the most points still have a preference for that shorter time, but then eventually going to a totally random system where everybody that's applying for that license has the same opportunity, the same chance. But then once they draw that they then would have to sit out for 10 years, or if in some cases it would be a once in a lifetime. Did the task force discuss that at all?
Dr. Schaefer?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Senator Baldwin, good to see you as well. So a couple of things here, and I'll ask the director to correct me where I may go off track. So we actually did recommend making ram bighorn sheep and bull moose once in a lifetime. And the legislature actually passed that change, I think, a couple of sessions ago. So for all intents and purposes, these are once in a lifetime permits, I believe now, for the exact reason that you pointed out. We did have some conversation about just eliminating the preference points in general. And that's where a lot of the debate, I'm trying not to speak for the task force, but I think if we could have reset knowing what we know now, we probably would have implemented a system much like we have with Mountain Goat, where it really would be just pure random, a random draw just based on the demand and numbers. We just couldn't come to agreement on what do you do with the people that have invested 20 some years and, however many dollars for each of those years of points into the system. And we just felt at the end, we wanted to find some way to really recognize that they've got that investment and honor those points. So I think if we could go back in time, we'd probably be right where I think you're at, which is we'll just go to a pure random. But it just, we've got so many people who have accrued these points. We couldn't figure out how to do that in a way that would be equitable and what we thought is fair. So Madam Chair, I'd ask Director Nesvik if he's got any additional information or correct anything that I maybe got wrong.
Director?
Madam Chair, Dr. Schaefer got it all right. The one thing I would add is we have recently received, one thing that kind of works in tandem with this particular idea was the move for bighorn sheep and for mountain goat and for moose to transition to a 90-10 split. So 90% to residents, 10% non-residents. One thing that's come up in our office recently is that those non-residents that have, bought years, points for 20 years, now with a 10% allocation for bighorn sheep have almost no chance in the random draw. And so 75% of the licenses are issued under the current system to the highest preference point holders. And then the other 25% goes into a random draw. The issue is that because of the low numbers of licenses, if you don't have 40 total licenses in a hunt area, there's no way under that system to allocate a random license. So there's almost no opportunity other than for those with the highest number of points, non-residents, to draw. If this were to change, they would still be in the system. We've seen a 37% decline this year in applicants for those licenses, and I suspect it's correlated with the 90-10 change. The other thing I did want to make real clear is while the number of points a person accumulates under the system that's contemplated in this bill, The number of points doesn't change. Just a person only accumulates 1 point per year. But then when it comes time to go into the draw, the number of chances they have in the draw is just their number of points that they hold squared. So if I've got 1 point, I go in my ticket gets put in the bucket one time. If I have 10 points, then I get 100 chances in the bucket. But I don't now have 100 points. I just have 10 points, and I accumulate one per year that I apply or purchase those points.
Other questions for either Dr. Schaefer or Director? I have just one, with this proposed system, how will that affect, you think? Or maybe you don't have any idea, but just potentially, how could that affect your revenue?
Madam Chair, I believe, this is speculative, but I believe it would probably actually increase the number of folks that are in the system, because it would incentivize those folks that don't have any points to get in, because they'd at least have some chance. We've seen through, right now, we have a super tag drawing with the odds are very low. You buy a ticket, and if you hit the lottery, you are able to get, a Bighorn sheep license. And if you hit the really big lottery, the trifecta, you get to pick 3. We know that a lot of people apply for those. So that leads me to believe that if there were bonus points available, more people would participate and get into the system.
Other questions from the committee? Yes, Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So Director, Dr. Schaefer, we're looking at a draft 23 LSO 0138, which means it was from the 23 session. That bill did not get across the finish line. What is different in this bill, what's being proposed today, over what happened last session in 23? Because, well, actually the 24 session. The main reason I ask that is if we don't know why it failed and don't fix that, I'm afraid it'll fail again.
Director?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative Burkhart, there are no changes in this bill. This is, I believe that Management Council asked for this to be considered. Am I correct? And so there's not been time for the committee to work on those challenges yet to see if there's ways to tweak this bill to make it. But as I recall, this bill actually failed in this committee. It didn't pass out of committee. If somebody remembers differently, please let me know.
So follow up, Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Follow up, thank you. So as we discuss this, will you have recommended changes in this, again, to make it more palatable to this committee, to others? It's a lot of long, hard work to get a bill all the way across the finish line. I mean, there are like 15 different steps that you've got to succeed at each one. And again, it takes a lot of effort. If we're going through the same motions, I don't know how we could expect to say nothing but the same result.
Director?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative Burkhart, the only response I'd have to that is that, doing this for quite some time, just like you now, I've seen a lot of successful legislation that's on its 3rd or 4th or 5th time through. And so I think that over time, people look at things differently. I don't have specific changes to recommend to this particular bill, but I got to be, completely upfront too. I don't remember exactly what the major concerns were from those that opposed the bill. I think there was a concern with those folks that had been in the system a long time and how it would affect those folks that had 25 points or right on the bubble, as Dr. Schaefer described, or kind of in the no man's land. I think that's probably where most of the opposition came from. But I mean, I think the bottom line is if the committee chooses to move forward with this, the members of the task force are certainly willing to work with the group to try to find ways to deal with any of the problems that folks have with it, members of the legislature have with it.
Madam Chair.
Madam Co-Chair? Go ahead, Dr. Schaefer, and then we'll follow up with the Co-Chair.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to make a comment to Representative Burkhart's point as well there. I think there's 2 things that are probably worth considering. One is the duration of the delay of implementation. the more years that you delay implementing it, the more likelihood is that you can whittle through those top point holders. And I'll offer to the director here that, you know, we could do some updated modeling on what that might look like to get through the majority of the top point holders. So that's one thing you could consider, is pushing out the implementation further. As I said, I don't have the other issue, but I think it's Representative Western's concern here is really the other sticking point, is that you're going to have these folks in this no man's land, this bubble, that arguably could eventually draw on the current model and system, but would not be guaranteed to do so once you shift away from a preference point model. I don't have a solution for that, but that may be an area worth exploration, because I think that's probably the one group that would have the greatest concern. And I think that was the debate. I believe it failed in the House, but I'm not, it's been a while as well. So I could be incorrect on that, but I thought it failed in the House. And I thought that was really the major sticking point, is what happens with these folks. I think Representative Western brought an amendment that tried to add some additional weight to certain applicants in that you know, that no man's land, if you will. But those would be the two areas that I would probably suggest need to be at least considered. And I think those would address the concerns that we heard during the session that was brought forward.
Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. As I recall, and looking at the bill online, it passed through the Senate quite easily, and then it got to the House.
Okay.
And was amended pretty extensively and ended up failing. So I think maybe those amendments might be part of the challenge that we're having.
Director.
Yeah, thanks for the reminder, because now this is all coming back to me. I do remember standing in the hallway with him, Representative Western, having some heated debates over this bill, and that's exactly right. It did go through the Senate and then had troubles in the House, so.
Yes, Madam Co-Chair.
Which rarely occurs.
Other comments from the committee? Okay, great. With that, I think, are we ready for Lucas to come up from LSO? And unless you have any other comments, Director?
No, man.
Okay. Lucas Plum, if he'll come up, he's just going to go over a quick overview of the bill as it is presented. Go ahead, Lucas.
Madam Chair. Yeah, Luke Plum with the LSO, here to discuss 2023 Senate File 88. Yeah, just a couple notes. Yeah, so this one did fail third reading in the House in the 2023 general session. It was sponsored by this committee at that time. And this bill was added to TRW's interim topics by Management Council. So that's why this introduced version of, the prior year's bill and we'll see that as well for the next one, is being brought to the committee just to see if you'd like to request a bill draft for this year, and then, you could work that one. But what this bill, essentially does, there's already been some really good discussion from Dr. Schaefer and Director Nesvik. It just essentially changes the preference points program for moose and ram bighorn sheep to bonus points. And so I'm going to kind of skip ahead a little bit, because the first couple of pages are just conforming amendments to include bonus point in with preference point, because there still will be a preference point program if this version of a bill were to pass. And so if you skip ahead to page 4 of the bill, it's in Wyoming Statute 23-1703B, or where the primary changes are. And essentially it changes that license issued under this subsection for moose and ram bighorn sheep would be through a weighted bonus point random drawing. And so any preference points that you had would be converted over to be a bonus point. And what this one would do is that once you have your bonus points, like 10 is a great version, those points are then squared for the actual draw, and that's what makes them the weighted bonus points. So then you'd have 100, essentially 100 entries into this random drawing. Previously, as the director had mentioned, under the preference points program, the preference point draw was 75% of the available licenses. This program would just change it all over to every single license for a moose or a ram bighorn sheep would be a random draw in the weighted bonus point program. And so it does remove quite a bit of language, but essentially, it's just changing the preference points to bonus points just for the moose or ram bighorn sheep. It would be a weighted random bonus point drawing. And it just would essentially still operate somewhat in the same way that the preference points do. You can still purchase bonus points in lieu of applying. And there's the stipulation that during the second year, if you haven't bought one, then you'll be considered a first-year applicant, but just for those two species. On page 6 and 7, it's subsection G. It does just say that there would still be a preference point program for antelope, deer, and elk, and that the commission can charge, as they currently do under the preference point program. And then there are just other conforming amendments throughout, subject to the provisions for any bonus point program for these ram and bighorn sheep, for residents and non-residents. It would continue similarly to the preference points. And then at the end of the bill, there's a couple additional sections. Section 2 is the applicability, which just says that this will apply to all moose and ram bighorn sheep hunting seasons that commence on or after January 1st, 2027. There's already a discussion that the implementation was to be delayed to allow the people who have a lot of preference points to be able to draw. And so if the committee were to bring this back, just something to be aware of is that was pushed out 2023 to 2027. Section 3 just allows for rulemaking by the Game and Fish Commission to transition preference points to bonus points for moose and ram bighorn sheep. And then I did have a split effective date for those two reasons, just to allow the program to get started. But I believe that that's a good run through, and I'd stand for any questions.
Any questions for Lucas? Yeah, thank you for that. Anything else Director, that you might want to add before we?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay. No other comments? All right. What is your pleasure, committee? Would you like to discuss the bill? Oh, public comment? Yeah, better do that, haven't we? Yeah. Let's get some public comment then. I know we have at least one or two people that might want to comment on this bill, so let's go ahead and open it up for public comment on LSO 0138. Anyone? Oh, wow. Okay. Well, with that, anyone online? Okay, we'll go ahead and close public comment then. Now, what's your pleasure on the bill? Yes, go ahead, Representative Western.
So, Madam Chairwoman, I really do appreciate that there's a serious problem with this, in the sense that we are continuing to lower the draw odds potentially to zero long-term, and that the average age of someone who draws these tags continues to get older and older. So I think there's a pretty high level of consensus on the problem. I think it's just, what are the options here? And as you heard President Schaefer allude to, is at the time of conversion, there's a pretty big cohort of resident hunters who have been waiting in line for 20 to 25 years, a long time. And at the moment of conversion, they're being asked to go from 80 to 90% draw odds to potentially sub 20%. At least that's some of the math that I've done on this. I think that's really, really tough. Asking them to go to 50% draw odds, I can understand we all have to sacrifice a little bit to solve a problem. I think that's fair, but asking them to go from the front of the line almost to the very back, I think is really, really tough because of that crowd out effect. Because if in a certain area, if you have, say, 50 or 60 of those high point holders, they're competing against 5,000 of those folks who have, say, at that 8 to 12 point class, because it's kind of that crowd out effect where they're kind of muscling out everybody else. And I think that's the concern. I think ultimately, if the committee wants to move forward with this bill, that's fine. I do think, and not just kind of being a no vote, I think there might be some other options that, obviously with your discretion, with the committee's discretion, it might be worthwhile to explore. And specifically, the one that comes to mind is the Idaho system. And while I'm not super familiar with the intricate nuance of their system, at a broad level, I think it might present an option for us to explore, perhaps with the commission and LSO. And what they do is they go tell all their resident hunters that want to apply for those trophy species. So, moose, goat, or I guess we don't preface for goat, lamb, but say moose and bighorn rams, is you have to pick one to apply for. Because as a resident, I can apply for bison, I can apply for goat, I can apply for moose, and I can apply for bighorn ram, which is great, obviously, because you can, at least get the odds of drawing one of those. But if you're, making resident hunters apply for just one, it has the potential to increase some of the draw odds, make it a little more fair and equitable system. So I guess my ask is of the committee and obviously with your discretion, Madam Chairwoman, is that maybe we can look into that for next time and maybe a conceptual motion for LSO to work with the commission on what would that look like, not just in a bill form, but also run through the numbers about what would it do for application odds, cohort, point cohorts, that kind of option, I think, because I think that's an option where some of those folks, it's truly equitable, but also doesn't diminish their draw odds the way it would in a strictly random draw, but also forces hunters to pick their species and potentially somewhat increase the draw odds of them being able to draw one of those really coveted tags. So that's kind of where I'm at a high level, certainly on this topic as a whole.
Other comments? Yes, go ahead, Representative Burkhart.
So, Madam Chairman, the way I look at it is you have people out there, and I think the current maximum number of points you can have is 28. I believe that's the number, whether it's for sheep or moose. That's when the system started. So those people who have 28 points have pretty much put in for 28 years at the top of the point system for them individually. At one point in time, the maximum number would have been 5, another time 10, now it's 28. In effect, they've been unsuccessful statistically for 28 years. Giving them 29 points will not improve those odds against all the others with 29 points. And if you do it statistically, look at the hunting areas, you can actually draw a license with a lot less than the maximum number of points. It may not be the exact area you want, but there are ways to do that if you work the statistics. So at this point in time, with all of that, I would move that we have staff draft a bill draft based on 23 LSO 0138 for discussion purposes.
Been moved and seconded that we go ahead and have LSO draft something that would be similar to 23 LSO 0-138. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay.
I was an aye,
There
Senator.
wasn't a
Sorry.
lot. Maybe we better go with hands. There wasn't a lot of participation there. How about if we go with hands? All those that are in favor, please put your hands up so I can get a better count. Okay, no opposed.
Okay, Madam
Okay, that's fast. Yes, go
Madam
ahead,
Chair.
Representative.
Chairwoman, that being a draft bill for this committee to consider. And I would imagine at the next interim committee meeting, we'd have a lively discussion on potential amendments. Look at it in depth from that discussion draft, ready to either frankly kill it or to proceed to the third meeting and have it filed as a bill. Would be my intention.
I think that's good advice. Obviously, I think the Management Council, adding this to one of our topics, they're fairly serious about us doing something with this bill. Like you said, either fixing it, maybe coming up with some other ideas, or just finding out that it's not going to work for us. So I think that's good advice, Representative. Any other comments from the committee?
Madam Chair,
Yes, go ahead, Representative. Oh, sorry. Can I allude to her? Okay, go ahead, Representative Ellis, or Senator Ellis. Sorry, my bad. There's so many
Thank you.
representatives here. I get
no
on it.
problem. Just a thought to loop in Senator Hicks in the formation of this bill.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I don't think we heard you. Senator Ellis.
Yeah, Madam Chair, thank you. Senator Hicks has been really involved in this issue and I think was pretty interested in having the TRW committee look at it. So as we form some work groups, maybe looping him would be prudent.
Thank you. That's good advice. Appreciate that. Anything else, committee? Representative Western, go ahead.
Madam Chairman, I think maybe just as something we can simultaneously consider at our next meeting. Of course, we can advance discussion, but the possibility of moving to the Idaho model, of forcing residents to pick their species that they apply for.
Representative Western, would you be interested in doing some work with a working group, maybe a subgroup?
I would allocate all the time necessary.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Anyone else interested in working with? Okay. Representative Byron, anybody else? Be interested? Okay, I guess it's, well, whoops, we got, there we go. Thank you, Representative Angelos. Okay. Let's put you folks in charge then of doing some work, some legwork before we get there. Like I said, I do think the Wildlife Task Force did a mountain of work, and I really appreciate Dr. Schaefer because I know he spent a lot of time and involved the college with statistics, and I know Director Nesvik is also, and his team, they've done a lot of work, and I'm fairly certain that's probably why the Management Council put this on our radar. We think that there's a potential to do something maybe different. So I think that's great. Let's go ahead and plan on that. So LSO, any questions on what we need from you? Sorry, he hasn't got a microphone.
Yeah, sorry, I was just on the other side. I just wanted to ask, so on that working group, is it just kind of an exploratory research group? Do you want us to just be, yeah, we can help in any capacity that you need, and yeah, that sounds good. Just wanted to confirm.
Perfect. All right. With that, if there's no other comments, let's move forward with the next section, which is on mule and whitetail deer split hunting seasons. Again, this is another thing that ended up on our plates from Management Council. And so we'll just turn the time over to Director Nesbitt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This one's probably a little bit fresher in many folks' memory. This was just discussed and worked through the process here at our most recent legislative session. This was another bill very similarly in this last effort that did pass the Senate and then was amended in the House and failed in the House. I don't remember which reading. But I think maybe there's a common theme here, Representative Western. But anyway, this and this isn't the first time this last session. I mean, this, in my recollection, in the last 13 or 14 years, this has come up multiple times. And frankly, where I've come down on this bill, and when I look at the impact potentially to how we manage wildlife and how this affects our state, essentially under the current system, we are able to manage the two species separately, and the department does that. We issue different types of licenses, and so we do manage these species separately. However, just looking at this very simplistically, very pragmatically, whitetail deer are not the same species as mule deer. And for a person to go and hunt either species, they go buy a deer license. We don't have this situation for any other big game species. We certainly do for small game. You know, if you buy a small game license, you can hunt multiple species. But with big game or trophy game, there are no, every distinct species has its own license. For that reason alone, you know, I think that there's some real merit to consideration of this bill. There are some second and third order effects, nothing that the department can't work through. You know, right now there's folks that have deer preference points. We'd have to figure out how to let those folks decide whether they want those to be whitetail deer preference points or mule deer preference points. There would be an opportunity, you know, right now in our state, we've got, I would say that the value that hunters place in a mule deer hunt versus a whitetail hunt, not universally by any stretch, but in general, the value is higher for a mule deer hunt than it is a whitetail hunt. And so there would be an opportunity to have different price points. We are places where we're trying to manage for less whitetail deer. And, you know, so to be able to have a cheaper whitetail deer license might help us to incentivize more people to buy whitetail licenses. We do, you know, most of that right now, that harvest is and where it has a management effect is for does and fawns, but oftentimes the folks that are willing to hunt does and fawns are the folks that first drew a buck license. And so that's where I think there's a nexus here to potentially help us with whitetail deer management. You know, other than that, I've got lots of statistics and lots of, you know, there's different pockets around the state that have varying levels of support for this bill for the most part. You know, most folks are fairly ambivalent to it. I will tell you that I hear from hunters that are concerned that if this were to pass, and even a couple legislators, that if this were to pass, that it would have an effect of potentially increasing the harvest on mule deer. I don't share that perspective, but it is something that, I mean, maybe we'll hear it during public comment. I do know that there's folks that also have concerns with drawing odds. So right now you've got to pick, you're either going to put in for this type of license that allows to hunt a buck whitetail, or you put in for this hard to draw mule deer license. Under this scenario, potentially, if the commission didn't make changes, person could put in for both, which would increase the people in the applicant pool in both, which then would potentially decrease the drawing odds. Now, one thing the commission would have the ability to do under existing law is to force folks to only put in for one or the other. I'm not necessarily advocating that that be something that I would recommend to the commission, but it is an option that they would have to be able to address that particular concern. With that, again, we've got this was a recommendation of the Wildlife Task Force. It had I can't tell you if it was unanimous, but if it wasn't unanimous, it was darn close support from the task force. I think we still have another member of the task force in the room. So if I say anything that doesn't sound accurate, please come forward there, Mr. Livingston.
You're doing great.
So that, Madam Chair, I would stand for any questions.
Questions for the director?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Representative Burkhart.
Let Senator Ellis go.
Oh, okay, Senator Ellis, there's a little delay. We'll go with you first and then we'll go to Representative Burkhart.
Thank you. I've been watching and I know there's a delay, so it makes it awkward. But my question has to do with, I think the amendments, I was just looking at what the House was considering, and it had to do with the fees. Maybe if someone, either the director or someone on the committee, I believe it was Representative Winter, offered that, just so we can better understand what that discussion was concerning the cost of those licenses.
Director or Representative Winter, do you have any comments on that?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. It just stands to reason that if you lower the price on these whitetail deer, you're going to have a lot better chance of selling a whitetail deer license than you would a mule deer. That was my hope, just my objective there. So,
Follow up,
Director,
Madam
any
Chair?
follow-up on that?
I would,
Yes, go ahead, Senator.
There's the delay. Please follow up. I'd be curious to know the director's thoughts on the idea.
I was just asking him, so we'll go with his discussion right now. Go
yeah,
ahead.
Madam Chair, I agree with Representative Winter. I do believe that more folks, a lower price point would help.
Other comments? Yes, Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So, Director, would it help on that? Because the legislature is the one who sets the fees. And I argued that in this bill during session. If the legislature wanted to give up that ability, the legislatures always set the fees to the department. Would it be useful to set the fee, and then I'll talk specifically whitetail, at a maximum and let the department charge a fee less than that if they feel necessary?
Director.
Madam Chair, Representative Burkhart, that's very workable for the commission.
Okay, Madam Chair, and a follow-up.
Follow-up, just go ahead.
So then, Director, I used to hunt extensively around the Douglas area, and they have both whitetail and mule deer intermixed. One year I passed up a shot on a very nice mule deer and ended up getting even a bigger whitetail. So that option is there. I think a lot of people appreciate that option. Would it be possible to put a combined license together at a lower price point, say, than $80 for a combined license? Maybe I'm picking a number here for no good reason, $60, and you can hunt both.
Director.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative Burkhart, that is possible. It would have to be a statutory change, though, because the legislature establishes all the fee types.
Follow up, Madam Chair.
Go
So,
ahead,
Director,
Representative.
that would be my intent. I'm just asking the department's opinion to put another category in there, call it a dual deer license, whitetail and mule deer, at a certain amount of money not to exceed. And I would put that in not to exceed so much. And then again, the department could adjust that downward if they felt they needed to do that.
Director?
Madam Chair, Representative Burkhart, my only recommendation would be if that was the wish of the body, would be to actually have three types.
Yeah.
A mule deer license, a whitetail license, and a combo.
Yeah.
And then having the discretion to establish the right price point is very workable for the commission.
Madam Chairwoman, that
Go
would
ahead.
be follow up. That would be my intention to have three categories. Thank you.
Anything else, committee? I think that makes total sense. That's, the light bulb just went on in my head when you started talking about it, so. Other comments from anyone? Okay, anything else, Rick?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay, let's go ahead and bring up Lucas again to just go through the bill real quick and we'll go from there.
Madam Chair.
Please go ahead.
This is, yes, 2024 Senate File 111. I think this one will be pretty quick. It does just go through and throughout Title 23, the Game and Fish statutes. It just splits up every reference to deer into mule deer and whitetail deer. And so it's mostly just conforming amendments. It does create a new duty of the commission to promulgate rules governing the issuance of separate hunting licenses and separate seasons for the taking of mule deer and whitetail deer. But then it just does run through. I would note for the committee, there's not staff comments included in this one, but there are a few sections such as like on page 4 of the bill draft in 23-1705C that, upon the payment of, the license fees for either a mule deer and a whitetail deer, the commission the commission can issue up to 25 licenses each year for the exclusive use of gunpowder and buckskin hunts. So it would just be some consideration for the committee to decide whether that should be 25 licenses for each species or 25 total licenses for deer. Other than that, I'm trying to think, like another one would be that each commissioner can have cause to be issued complimentary licenses, and it splits up mule deer and whitetail deer. Just another question of, that number, it's at no more than a total of 8, and whether or not it can be, how you would split that up for the two species. And kind of the third one under that vein is that 75 of the mule deer and whitetail deer licenses shall be used for the national bow hunt, and whether that should be 75 for each species or not. So there's just a few areas like that that could be highlighted if a bill were to be brought for the next meeting. I will note that in the licensing section where it actually provides license fees, this bill draft did split it out. So it's resident mule deer license, non-resident, all those ones. And then there's new language creating like for the resident whitetail deer. And it's all the exact same numbers, just so that was kind of just an easy starting point. And so those numbers could be changed, very easily if you wanted to add additional types. That there might be need to be conforming amendments, but that could be accomplished fairly easily. And then just throughout the bill, the rest of it is really just splitting it up. And this bill draft did have just a slightly different effective date of January 1st, 2025. As sometimes Game and Fish likes that year, kind of that year start to just to match their hunting seasons. But I believe with that covers the bill, and happy to stand for any questions.
Questions for Lucas? Well, I don't see any. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Anything else from the director?
No, Madam Chair.
With that, let's go ahead and open it up for public comment on this bill. Do we have some folks that want to comment? Come on up.
Madam Chair, Jess Johnson, the Wyoming Wildlife Federation. I wasn't going to comment on this, but I just had a thought hearing the discussion around the cost split outs, and considering our discussion from this morning around funding, I would just urge that we maybe don't lower the whitetail, but we look at putting a little more credit on the mule deer. And, I think people are willing to pay for that. And, as we go back to the funding discussion, we did a survey of all of our members with WWF, and over 90% of our members are in favor of upping resident license fees. So there's a lot of citizen hunter buy-in to this, especially I think when you look at mule deer and you look at others. We're pretty blessed here in this state, not just for the resources, but for, a lot of people, it's a low cost. I put in, I get 10 tags and I spend maybe $320. It's incredible. I am willing to pay more for that level of experience and to have that. And especially when we look at mule deer and the quality of that. So if you go forward with that, I'll say, I would just caution against lowering the tag price and just maybe look at upping the one where the experience and the quality is a little higher in that sense, or the value for it is.
Questions for Jess? Ms. Johnson, I mean. Yes, Representative Burkhardt.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So, Ms. Johnson, I can understand that too, and it wouldn't affect me. I wouldn't quit hunting for an extra, say, $10 on a mule deer tag. And while your members may appreciate that or support it, what about the rest of the state? And frankly, the legislature and a number of people's approach of we won't raise any fees or taxes. You have to get any bill through the legislature. I would hate to put an additional fee on mule deer just to kill the bill later.
Ms. Johnson?
You know, I think you have a very good point there. I think we're at the place where we have world-class resources and hunters better be willing to pay for it. Our survey that we put out was, we gave a scope and it was between, I think, 10 to 15, or maybe it was $5 to $15 license increase. So we didn't ask for more than that. It wasn't exorbitant. Frankly, if we want to have the resources that we have here, we do have to pay for them. And I think there's a large contingency of the hunting community that believes that, not just WWF members. I've heard it from almost every wildlife group out there that there is an appetite for this. And certainly there will be an appetite against it as well. But as we always sort of fondly say, it's not a tax. It's what did we call it? An mandated donation. But I put it on like the fact that we still have world-class mule deer in this state, and they are a general tag. You can kill a mule deer that is a Boone and Crockett level mule deer on a general tag as a resident in this state. You don't get that any other place. And we better be willing to pay for that because it's incredible.
Other questions for Ms. Johnson? Okay, thank you for your testimony. Anyone else in the room that would like to testify on this bill? Gosh, this is a quiet group. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and close public testimony. Was there anybody else online? No? Okay, we'll go ahead and close public testimony. Committee, what are your thoughts on this bill? Yes, go ahead, Representative Byron.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I just think it's worth noting for those that might not have last year's votes in front of them that, as the director pointed out, that this sailed through the Senate and sailed through our House TRW committee 9-0, and then in the matter of about 4 days ended up failing in the House on third reading, and a number of us that had voted to pass it had a change of heart. So it got pretty complex at the end, and that's what I worry. And I think specifically some of the amendments Representative Winters brought helped the bill. I think some potential amendments that have been discussed today could potentially help the bill, but I have grave concern on the amount of work that we're talking about putting into something that's been a friend of the bodies for a number of years, it sounds like, from the director, to end up back at a House third reading failed 2834. So and I was an eye on this, and I continue to be supportive of it because I think it's been outlined very clearly. It was a major issue, but I think as we move forward in the next few minutes, it's worth really digging deep and deciding right now, are we going to be eyes here and then nose when we get down there, or potentially get down there, some of us. But I just think it's worth a bigger discussion amongst this group as we decide to maybe take some direction, or maybe not discuss that, but think in your own head if you want to move forward and how you're going to vote to proceed here or not.
I just noticed that Senator Grew has joined us. Senator Grew, do you have anything you'd like to add to the conversation? Nothing like putting you on the spot, but.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize to everybody. I've been listening to the entire conversation, and this is just the first time I've gotten to a point where I can get on camera. So I'm listening intently, and like I say, I ask for your indulgence. Thank you.
Other comments from the committee? Okay. Is there a motion to move the bill, or are we still needing some more discussion? Okay, a motion by Senator Baldwin. Is there a second? I'm not sure we have to have one, but no, we got a second by Representative Winters. Okay. All those in favor of moving this bill forward, it's 24 LSO-0468. Please indicate by raising your hand. Okay, those opposed? Okay, that bill has passed. And so we'll go ahead and move forward with that LSO. I think you could probably go ahead and draft it as is, and then we can just work the heck out of it at our next meeting. Maybe we'll have some ideas from the director and other folks on the committee about things that we can do to improve it, make it better before, we head down to the Temple of Doom. Sorry, did I say that out loud? I meant to just think that. All righty. Well, with that, we'll move forward as long as we got Director Nesbitt. Oh, yeah. Director Nesbitt now is going to go ahead and talk a little bit about invasive species mitigation. So we'll turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So actually, this is going to be a little bit different type of invasive species presentation today. I'm joined by our Chief of Fisheries, Alan Osterland, and you're going to have an opportunity tomorrow to talk a little bit on your tour about illegal fish importations and specifically a problem at Buffalo Bill. But what I've asked Alan to do here today is committee's heard a lot about invasive quagga and zebra mussels today to talk about a whole nother problem with regards to non-native or introduced fish that creates a lot of problems in some of Wyoming's waters and some of the incidents that we've had recently. So I will turn the microphone over to Chief Osterland.
Chief Osterland, go ahead.
Afternoon, Madam Chair, committee members. Alan Osterland, Chief of Fisheries, appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today about illegal introductions. I know you're probably pretty excited not to hear about mussels. You've heard me talk a lot about that. So illegal introductions of fish into waters of Wyoming and the West can and has been a significant impact to both the local economies in some instances and the ecology of the water bodies that they come into. So what is it? Illegal introductions is where someone moves a fish from one body of water to another. The department has authority to regulate where fish go in the state. A private landowner can submit an application to stock a reservoir or pond on their private land, and the department can give authorization for that. Public waters of the state are under the department's jurisdiction, and we stock all those waters. So what happens sometimes is a person might have grown up fishing for walleye or perch, for instance, and want that opportunity near a water near them. And so they'll take it upon themselves to move a species from one water body to another. Wyoming is a headwater state, mostly trout, cold water species, but we do have some areas in the state that do have populations of walleye, perch, bluegill, northern pike, and they'll take those fish from one water body to another. And I don't think a lot of times they recognize some of the impacts that they can have to a system. For instance, there's being a headwater state, a lot of our waters aren't really productive. And the department over the decades has managed waters or began to understand what species of fish work best in what waters. And so when you throw another mouth in there, it can throw everything out of balance. I'll give you an example of Saratoga Lake in 2021 and 2021, early 2022, perch were discovered in the lake. Saratoga Lake's about a 100-acre reservoir near Saratoga, and it's been traditionally managed as a trout fishery. It has a direct connection to the North Platte River system. We don't have any perch in that surrounding area. We don't have any perch in the river around Saratoga. We don't have it downstream in Seminole Reservoir, Pathfinder Reservoir, Alcova Reservoir. Not until you get down to Glendale Reservoir do we have any perch. So to have perch in Saratoga Lake was really concerning to us, because if they were to get into the river system and then drift down, it could impact the walleye fisheries, the trout fisheries, and some of these reservoirs all the way down through the system. So we had to make a really hard decision on what we're going to do there. You know, our management folks are in the business because they want to produce things and produce a good fishery. We didn't want to impact to the river system, so we decided that we're going to have to treat the reservoir. And when I say treat, we treat it with a natural based chemical product called rotenone, but it inhibits the absorption of oxygen and gild animals like fish. And so we worked with the community and stakeholders in the area, and we treated the reservoir to remove all the perch. We remove all the perch, remove every fish in the reservoir. And that project alone cost the department, just in the rotenone and supplies, $140,000. It also included 1,150 man hours for putting the rotenone in the reservoir, cleaning up fish, additional sampling after that, and then restarting the fishery the next year after we were sure that all the perch were out of it. It took away angling opportunity for a time period for those folks in there. The town had an annual derby that they held every winter that they weren't able to do that winter. So it, you know, the intention, who knows what the intention would have been. We think that this was an illegal introduction because there's no perch anywhere near there that they could have jumped from on a bird's feed or any other way. We think that somebody put those in there. So had a lot of sportsmen's dollars went into that treatment there, and it removed a lot of the local economy dollars that would be coming in there. And I'll give you another example of, you know, I've talked a lot about game fish. You know, goldfish are another species that find their way into our waters and can have a significant impact because they eat stuff too. And they'll remove nutrients from the system. They'll cause the water to become really muddy and not really productive for trout. Just go north of town here in the Newton reservoirs there, we have a west and an east that we've managed for a long time. The west was more of a general regulation fishery, and the east was more of a trophy fishery. Well, along the line, somebody let goldfish into the west reservoir. And, you know, I'm sure that in their heart, they thought they were doing a good thing by releasing their pet goldfish instead of the other alternatives. But it has had a significant impact on that and those fisheries. We've done a lot of work, and the community's done a lot of work to try to keep them out of East Newton. Now they're in East Newton. And so at some point in time, we may have to treat that reservoir. And these are smaller reservoirs that we can treat. You get into some larger systems like Flaming Gorge or Burbot, where we believe illegally introduced into that. That's throwing an imbalance in that whole system. We used to be really good smallmouth fishing, and smallmouth are really declined. And we've had to put lots of different regulations in place and do removal of Burbot, and Flaming Gorge is a big reservoir. Another big system that we have, and I'm just touching the high points because there's a lot of other places, but I know you guys have are probably short on time, but Buffalo Bill Reservoir, I'll just touch on that real briefly because you're going to hear about more tomorrow on the tour. But in 2008, walleye showed up in the reservoir. They've probably been there for a little while before they were discovered. Buffalo Bill Reservoir is managed as a wild trout fishery, and it supplies a lot of the fish for the North Fork, which is a blue ribbon water that brings a lot of anglers to the community, and the South Fork as well. And throwing a predaceous fish like walleye in there, they'll lay trout. And there's no way that we could treat a system that size, nor would we want to. And, you know, we're not stocking any fish in there. It's totally, reproduction's wild. So it's really a gem. We don't have many systems like that in the state. And so over the years, we've conducted studies, food web studies, suppression studies. We spend a lot of time, our crews do every year, netting walleye, figuring out where they spawn at, going out there in the spring when the weather is not real great a lot of times, and the wind can blow out there, and netting these walleye, trying to suppress the population to a level that we think that we can still sustain a really good trout fishery. But we could be doing that forever, just because somebody along the line thought that it was a good idea to throw walleye in there so that they may be able to catch those walleye in a local area that they live by. And we've done some analysis on some of those fish, and we can link it back to a reservoir north of here where they probably originated from. So in that case, we're really sure that those fish were put in there by somebody who wanted to start a walleye fishery. Very selfishly, not looking down the road of what that could do to how it can impact a lot of different people. So what do we do? So we do have a really good statute currently on the books. It's 23-4-101. And that says that it's illegal to introduce fish or eggs into any public water without the consent of authorization of the department. And it's a high misdemeanor. So under statute 23-6-202, they can get up to a year of in jail or $10,000 fine. And they can get revocation of their fishing privileges for lifetime, up to a lifetime. In addition to that, they can get civil penalties not to exceed the cost incurred by the commission for removal of a fish. So it's got some pretty good teeth into it. But these cases are pretty hard to make. You know, either got to catch somebody in the act of doing it, or have somebody that might have information about it and that is willing to step forward. So, you know, a lot of Western states, including ourselves, what we're doing is more of an informational and education campaign. You know, you can see advertisements in their fishing regs saying it's illegal to move fish around, and here's why. And so we're trying to really educate the public that, you know, it might seem like a pretty insignificant thing to move a walleye to a different water just so you can catch them later, but it can have some substantial impact. And you know, tomorrow you're going to hear from our regional fisheries folks about Buffalo Bill and more about the cost that's been associated with the suppression efforts to date and what the future might bring. So I won't go into that much further, but and then also, you know, I think it's important that we continue to get the information out on the cases we do make. You know, we don't make that many, but the ones that we do, we want to make sure that we get the information out there so the public knows that it's a serious crime and has a serious impact. And so with that, I'll stand for any questions you might have.
Questions for the chief? Yes, go ahead, Representative Singh.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Chief. You were describing a lot of different scenarios when it came to how different non-native fish populations could be introduced to a body of water. And so how is it that this population is getting to the level that it's actually making a measurable impact on the local ecology? So is it, you know, 10,000 Timmies dropping off their goldfish, or is it someone is able to introduce a small amount of fish that are then able to reproduce in the water, or are there folks that are bringing almost a pseudo industrial amount of fish and depositing that into the body? What's going on there?
Go ahead, Chief.
Sure, Madam Chair, Representative Singh. So yeah, good question, that I should have touched on, but so species like perch, are highly reproductive. So if they get into a water body, what we've seen around the state, there's a few waters that, will have populations that grow to, lengths that anglers want to keep to eat. But most of the time what happens is they'll outproduce the fish that we're managing for in there. So we have one situation where we tried to manage for trout in one particular reservoir, perch got put in there, and we can't put trout in anymore because there's not enough groceries to go around. Those perch outcompete them. They out reproduce. They eat what available forage is there. And so we're having to change our management strategy. Now walleye, for instance, and that can only take a few fish. And over time, as they reproduce, it's exponential, and then they outcompete. Sometimes it takes a little longer than others, depending on the water. But when you've, like in Saratoga Lake, for instance, when we were sampling there, they saw multiple age classes of those fish, so we knew that they were producing. So rather than wait for that population get to a level where we might have escapement into the river, we decided we need to act then. And walleye, for instance, in a fishery like Buffalo Bill, they eat a lot of trout. And so they've been there quite a few years now, and over the years in the netting, they've caught some really big walleye in their females that produce a lot of eggs. So we knew it was just a matter of time if we didn't get on it real quick that population was going to get to a level that was probably going to outcompete the trout.
Follow up. Okay. Other questions? Yes, go ahead, Representative Western.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. You kind of talked about some of the reservoirs, obviously, in southern part of the state and over here. Is there any update or any movement on some of the reservoirs in my country and the Bighorns? Director?
Chief, go ahead.
So Madam Chair, Representative Western, as far as legal introductions. DeSmet, yeah, that would be probably the biggest one. So we manage DeSmet for recreational fishery where we stock trout in there, and we now have walleye in there, and we now have lake trout in there that we didn't put in there too. So and over the years, DeSmet is a cold water fishery, so you think that walleye aren't going to do well there. Well, they're doing fine. And they're reproducing multiple age classes, so that's impacting the trout fishery. And then you throw lake trout on top of that. It's two apex predators in the fisheries world that some of those lake trout are getting extremely large, and those lake trout, they live for a long time, so they can get big and they can eat a lot of groceries. So yeah, that's in Flaming Gorge, we're trying to adjust things there to get a handle on lake trout. If again, if something is put in there that throws things out of balance, it takes a long time to get it back into balance sometimes. So, the jury's out on DeSmet as far as where we're going to go, but we'll probably in the future be looking at doing some adjustments as far as trying to manage those lake trout to a more manageable level so that we can sustain a good kokanee fishery and a good rainbow fishery and something that an angler can catch from the shore rather than from the boat. And then you got the mouth of the walleye in there too that are impacting it. So, yeah.
Chief, just another follow-up on the Flaming Gorge. I did have a gentleman that talked to me not that long ago. He was pretty sure that the kokanees were being affected by something that the Game and Fish had planted in there. And I said, no, I can't imagine that. I said, they know what they're doing. But he said something about the pups, which would be the babies of the lake trout, I assume. And he said, I think that's what's causing the issue. And I said, well, I do know that the water levels got really quite low there. And I'm sure that had a little something to do with it. Could you elaborate on that?
Madam Chair, Senator Schuler. So yeah, you're exactly right on water levels that, we think that potentially could have had an impact on the shore spawning kokanee. And, we do stock a lot of kokanee in there as well. But, one thing that we've seen over the years is that, the number of younger lake trout, anywhere up to about 25 inches, 26 inches, that's what the locals refer to as pups. And, there's a lot of people that would like to catch a 25-inch pup. But, we've watched that population just increase. And so again, there's only so many mouths to feed. And so we think that they're really impacting the kokanee fishery. It's impacting the body condition of these larger lake trout, the trophy lake trout, because they're removing some of the forage base for them as well, the smaller fish. So the department's really, again, Flaming Gorge is a huge reservoir, so being able to do a high level of suppression is kind of difficult. We are looking at doing some removal, some netting removal, but one thing we wanted to do is give the public an opportunity to help us out. And so we're proposing regulation changes coming up in July, which would alter lake trout and Flaming Gorge are considered game fish right now. The regulation would move that to non-game fish, so people would be able to take as many fish as they wanted out of the reservoir on any given day. And that gives them an opportunity to help suppress that smaller lake trout population, which hopefully in the future will bring the kokanee population back up and increase the body condition of the larger lake trout, the trophies.
Any other questions from the committee? Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Anything else, Director, on the aquatic species mitigation issues?
No, Madam Chair, I don't believe so. I look forward to hearing back from you. I won't be able to be there tomorrow. I've got to go down and chair the Animal Damage Management Board meeting in Casper. But I do look forward to hearing your feedback on the tour that I know that most of your tour tomorrow is about state parks, but we'll have our little portion there on the walleye and Buffalo Bill. So
We appreciate all the information. You've had a tough day today, so,
yeah.
but you've done well for us. Thank you.
Mhm.
I think we'll probably turn the time over to Representative Newsom so she can kind of give us an idea of where she wants to meet tomorrow. And before we even talk about directives, do you have any idea? Yeah. Oh, any public comment on what we just talked about with the aquatic mitigation? Sorry, I keep forgetting to include the public. My bad today.
So I guess
Thank you.
we need to circle back, as promised earlier, back to the game and fish funding overview and maybe talk about some possible legislation on page 14 of the handout that we got. The license recoupment, property tax exemption, commission authority to set fees and application fee increases. So maybe let's start at the top of the list with license recoupment. I don't know what legislation would look like for that, or if it would be in each of those categories where there are licenses to add in those statutes that those will be reimbursed from the general fund. Is that
Madam Chair.
kind of what you're thinking?
No, Madam Chair, there's no need for a statute because the statute exists. It says right now that that the legislature can do recoupment. And again, they did for every year from 2007 to 2020 and then stopped in 20. And so my ask is only that there's a recommendation that goes to Joint Appropriations Committee to go back to where we were pre-2020, use the existing authority and do the recoupment allocation.
Okay. Entertaining a motion to that effect?
Madam Chairwoman, I guess
Representative?
I'm confused,
Okay.
if I might. So is the recoupment already currently in statute, or was it removed from statute, Director?
Madam Chair,
Director.
Representative Burkhart, it's in statute. It says the legislature may. And so when they stopped in 2020, they just used their discretion to not do the recoupment. It's existing law. It's available now.
Follow up, Madam Chair.
Yes,
So
Representative.
appropriations has said not to use it, or if it's already in statute, why isn't it being done?
Madam Chair, Representative Burkhart,
Director.
because it says may. And so when there was a lot of discussion in the Joint Appropriations Committee regarding cutting budgets in 2020 in the face of COVID, when there was, there was a large scale budget cut then. And it was during those discussions where the Joint Appropriations Committee said, we're pulling this that we've had in the standard budget for 13 years, we're pulling this out in the face of these budget cuts. And so the way I understand the existing statute, all it would take was for Joint Appropriations Committee to reallocate it and then for it to go through the whole budget process.
Senator Guru, do you have light to shed? Mr.
No,
Appropriator,
perpetual
Senator
darkness-
Appropriator.
Perpetual darkness here, Madam Chair. No, I do remember those discussions, and I remember the pullback on that funding when we were all faced with, pretty extreme situation, that 2018, 2020 period. I'm sure, and I can't speak for the Appropriations Committee, nor would I, but as one member, I'd be more than happy to take the message to them that it's time to readdress that in light of new circumstances. And the testimony this morning regarding, the inflationary kind of hit that they've been taking within their own budget. And so, I'd be more than happy to kind of take that over to our co-chairs and talk to them about it and move forward if that's the will of the committee.
Thank you, Senator. So once again, I would entertain a motion to draft a letter to the Joint Appropriations Committee that we're requesting that they go back to allowing for that license recruitment. Senator Schuler and Senator, yeah, I have 5 seconds, so we can choose one of those. Hearing that, then is there any discussion? Okay, then we'll go ahead and vote. All those in favor say aye. Opposed,
Aye.
no. Okay, so we will have that. Thank you, Senator. So we'll have that letter drafted. LSO would do that. Representative Burkhart.
Okay. Madam Chairwoman, I'd like to make an additional motion if we're done with that one.
Sure.
That would be to make a statutory change of changing one word, change may to shall.
Okay. Do I have a second? Seconded by JT Larson to change the may to a shall for that recoupment, and that would be a bill draft.
Yes.
Okay, any discussion on that? All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Okay, so that passes. We'll go ahead, Lucas, and have a bill draft to change that may to a shall. Any other discussion about license recruitment? Okay, then we'll go to property tax exemption. The request is that the buildings be exempted, but not the land that Game and Fish owns. Is that
That was my proposal, Madam Chair.
okay?
And the specific statutory reference for everybody's records here is Wyoming Statute 39(1)(201) subsection A(ii).
Representative Western.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just for clarification, Director, was that just for the buildings? Did I hear that correctly, or for all the fee land of Game and Fish?
So Madam Chair, my request would be that all Game and Fish owned buildings where their primary purpose is public use or public interaction, that those buildings be exempted.
Buildings
from
and
property
land,
taxes, not land.
but the land. the
I do
building
think that
sits on?
land is something that will make it more controversial, and so I would recommend that the land is
Okay.
left under that we continue to pay property taxes on land that the commission owns.
Any comments, Representative Storr?
Question, Madam Chairman.
Absolutely.
And I'm just curious on the land, is the land subject to the agricultural assessment?
Director?
Madam Chair, Representative Story, yes.
I have a question about, so in my property tax assessments, I have a amount of tax I pay on the building and then the amount of tax that I pay on the land that the building sits on. And so I'm wondering, I know that we're trying to exempt like big blocks of land are not exempt, but continue to pay on big blocks of land that the department owns. But I'm wondering if you want to just pay, not pay property tax on the building, like for this building. So there's an assessment for the building itself, and then there's an assessment for the land it sits on. And it seems like we should exempt the building and the land that it sits on, but do you see that as problematic?
Madam Chair, I do not, and that would be, and I've actually seen it both ways. So I've seen the assessment come where the lot where the building sits is all wrapped into one assessment. I guess different counties must do it differently.
Oh,
So I wasn't aware of that. I didn't think of that, but my request would be that the building and the lot or the land that it sits on should be exempted because it's for a public purpose. To serve the public, whereas wildlife habitat management areas, I don't know how to craft the wording here yet, but wildlife habitat management areas that are managed for wildlife habitat and access and outdoor recreation, that those should be continue to fall under this exemption.
okay. Lucas, is that making sense to you? Okay. Representative Storer?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I think we talked about this a lot in Revenue Committee with these exemptions last session. And so some language that just says that the buildings and the associated land would make sense for including the land that this building, for example, sits on as part of that exemption, I think makes sense.
Thank you. Representative Andrew?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And speak kind of dovetailing off of that with some of the things we brought up in Revenue Director, do you, as we're having this discussion, and certainly I'm in favor of this direction, off the top of your head, can you think of any facilities like this that might sit on 150, 200, 500 acres? I'm just trying to get out ahead of it. So, I mean, I just quickly looked at some mapping and this parcel is not large here. I mean, this is a beautiful, large facility, but certainly makes it really easy. I'm just trying to make it as easy as we can in this bill draft. And maybe we revisit this later, but just for the committee's knowledge that, you know, some of our discussions as we went down these exemptions and have discussed these exemptions is you might have a house we were trying to give some relief or some sort of property tax, help to, but it sat on a very large piece of land, which made things complicated. So you may not have that. I think about my neck of the woods and in the western side of the state, and those seem to be pretty small lots, but certainly the least we could do would be the improvements. And I think the best we could do for you includes the land. I just want to maybe forecast, up to a certain amount of acreage, or I forecast an issue as we kind of go down that way with LSO.
Director?
So Madam Chair, Representative Byron, I can't actually think of a couple and they're very different. One is our research center. It's not for public access and for public hunting. It's to house wildlife that we're doing research on, and it has a lot of buildings on it. And then I can also think of a WHMA that has a wildlife habitat management area that also has a house on it that a game warden lives in. So what I would commit to the committee is if you direct LSO to move forward with a bill draft, that we would do an inventory of all of our property before the next meeting and ferret out what this looks like, and then also have some recommended language for what would make sure it covered the need.
Representative Larson?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So I guess I just want your thoughts on the statement that I'm about to make. My concern is if we're only exempting the buildings and the associated property because it's for public use, then in a way we're admitting that the other things are not for the benefit of the public. And really, I think that the entire agency and your efforts benefit the public in some ways, no matter what it is. Even if you don't have a hunter or a fisher, or that's not something you partake in, I think there are benefits statewide regardless. I mean, so I just want your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think you make a great point, Madam Chair, if I may, and you make a great point. It's already there in existing statute. It says primarily for a governmental purpose. Is how it's currently defined in statute. Well, those properties are primarily for a governmental purpose. They're owned by an agency of the state. So there may be even a way to make that language more aligned with the point you're making, as if this is to move forward in a process and through the interim.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wondering if the director has reached out to the Department of Revenue, and I appreciate that we've got people that are serving on Department of Revenue or the Revenue Committee right now chiming in, because this has been something that's been kicked around as long as I've been in the legislature, and we haven't quite ever defined what governmental purposes is. So I think, it might sound straightforward, but it might be pretty tricky. And to Representative Larson's point, he just nailed it right there. So just a word of caution. I don't know that this is going to be easy, but the question is if you've reached out to the Revenue Committee.
Director.
Madam Chair, Senator Ellis, I have not reached out to the Revenue Committee. If that's something that this committee feels is important, then we're glad to do it.
Follow up, Senator.
Just to follow up, last week at Minerals, we had requests for some tax alterations, and we asked them to visit with Minerals, and with Revenue, and if Revenue didn't want to pick it back up, then maybe we'd look at it again as a Minerals Committee. So I don't know if there's some thinking there, but these might be, again, just a little trickier than what we're envisioning right now talking about.
Okay. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Senator Ellis raises a good point because I served with her on the Revenue Committee. And if you remember, we talked about this regarding medical facilities and public use, this exact same issue and governmental purposes, and end up not going through. So it would be good to go back and review that Revenue Committee's talking about this very subject, about governmental use as it was related to medical facilities.
Representative Singh.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is for the director. Are there any other departments that have property tax exemptions for their properties?
Director.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative Singh. My understanding is that the only other agency that has some variation is State Parks. I'm going to see if I can find it really quickly here. I'm not real familiar with their particular situation, but I think they're mentioned in the same statute. No, it's not in this statute, but I've heard of it. Do you happen to know, Deputy Director Will Tanger, what the state parks?
Don't.
Oh, here it is. Okay. I'm just going to read this out loud so that everybody hears it. The Wyoming Game and Fish Commission is one of two state agencies that pay a tax on real property it owns. The other state agency, State Parks, which pays an in lieu of tax on its buildings, but not on its land, vice versa. And then the Game and Fish Commission pays tax on both its land and buildings.
Follow up.
Yes, Madam Chairman. I guess my only concern is that we would be picking favorites amongst the agencies and even making exemptions for property taxes when it's difficult enough to get that passed for the average citizen. And so that's just something I'm thinking about.
Representative Byron.
To the good representative point, we're also talking about agencies that are still in our general fund. So we're talking, I think the director is bringing us just a talking point, which we're talking about an agency that is not necessarily, or not necessarily, is not receiving money from our appropriations and is contributing to the money that you as a representative get to decide how to distribute. So certainly getting where it's getting at, but those that previously served on revenue and Representative Stoner and myself who served on revenue, the word exemptions seems to really frighten people on our committee. And I don't want to speak for all of it, but certainly I think for us, and I think there's a way to craft this and make a swing at it, because the definition of, for the benefit of government, maybe we need a new definition that, that looks at for the benefit of game fish or for the benefit of whatever it may be. So a little bit of a scary carve out, but I think certainly something I'm still interested in. And remember, there's a whole picture, a broad picture that director has brought us, one of the, 4 or 5 things that he's just recommending. So I certainly think it would be worth going down this road as I watch people all day pull off of a highway and use this wonderful facility and any way we can continue to help Game and Fish instead of, vote down their funding mechanisms, I think is beneficial to our wildlife, which we're also proud of.
Senator Ellis.
Just to follow up on that thought for Representative Singh, one of the conversations we had years ago, and I appreciate Senator Baldwin. Maybe there's a reason he and I are retiring, is we spent too much time on the revenue committee talking about these issues. But with state parks, you can rent a campsite, you can rent a yurt, and there was conversations about, well, is that really a governmental purpose? You're competing with the private industry, the KOAs of Wyoming and other private campgrounds, and what's the appropriateness of paying tax or not paying tax on those lands? So again, this is a big can of worms.
Representative Storr. Any? Co-chairman Schuler.
Just a comment. That's why I got off revenue after 2 years. I didn't want to retire. So hallelujah.
And now you're telling me to go to revenue.
All right, well, we will just stop
Madam Chair.
disparaging the revenue committee momentarily. We can come back to disparaging the revenue committee later. Any other comments on this possible bill draft that we're talking about?
Madam Chair.
Representative Singh.
Thank you. And just to acknowledge, Representative Byron there, that is true. Game and Fish is, in a special situation that their income is almost entirely self-sufficient. And, well, if they're going to be getting property tax exemptions, then are they going to be able to draw from the general fund? So that is something I'm thinking about. So.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So I think, in the future, we're the legislature, we can decide if we want to issue general funds again for special projects to the Game and Fish. And, the property taxes go to the local counties and those local districts. It doesn't go to the state. So regardless, I don't think that's a major point of contention in this.
Any other comments, questions? Representative Storr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think really the question is, does it make sense for the state to help support wildlife management by creating such an exemption that the rest of the state government actually enjoys, right? And so in this case, really the carve out has been for Game and Fish and state parks. For the question that Senator Ellis suggested, where do we draw the line in terms of what is the governmental purpose? But I think the argument that can be made is that these are wildlife management is a benefit to all Wyomingites and frankly the world, and that there is at least an argument to be made that we all benefit from that, not just sportsmen and women who are primarily paying for the budget of Game and Fish. So I think from that perspective, there's an argument to be made here. I would just ask that maybe working with Department of Revenue, and happy to help, to get that inventory done, and also to look at what percentage of property tax that's collected in each county, to understand whether that's a meaningful amount or not would be helpful. And at least for me, considering what might be considered exempted. So I'd ask you to do that as well. Thanks.
Anything else from the committee? So what I'm hearing is that we would like you, Director, to do some research on what this would cost county by county, what you're paying county by county. And then maybe check with the revenue department, but this is more of a county issue than a state issue, it seems.
Madam Chair, just to be really clear, so check with the revenue committee to see if they're interested, or the revenue department? And if it's the revenue department, what information am I looking for there?
Representative Storer,
Just total property tax collected in the county.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, we can do that now. We've got that information. so
Okay,
we can do
great.
that.
so what I think, and Representative.
Sorry, just to add a little more to this. I just quickly did some searching and looked at, I think about when I go buy a elk tag at our Game and Fish on North Cache, where I go renew my license plate, where I go and renew my license plate is, and pay money is exempt. And I just think along those same lines that there's a valid argument here. How we get there is obviously what we're talking about. Director did share some numbers already today, and it was, I might be wrong, in the 800,000 range. So we're, I think we got to remember, we're not talking about 8 million. And I certainly recognize the 800,000 range, but is a lot of money, but in our total tax roll, it's, it certainly would help, we're talking about almost 1% back to his department. We're talking about $100 million budget and a micro percent in the bigger picture. So yeah, any way we can get there, and Representative Storer and I maybe can help as we're the ones that sound like we're retiring soon because we're on revenue committee, or we're turning grayer. Yeah, because we have a wonderful revenue department that is eager and ready to always help with this stuff.
So my question to the committee is, would we take this on as our committee, or do we believe that revenue is the proper place? So let's see a show of hands if we think that
Madam Chair?
TRW is the proper committee to do this work. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Ellis.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry for the delay, but on that point, one option would be we could take it on, have a bill draft, see if we introduce it or not, and then see if we can get a commitment to have it to present, like our chairman to present it to the revenue committee before they're at their final meeting to make them aware of it. That's just another option.
Okay. I think that's a good idea. So those that would like TRW to take this potential bill draft on, please raise your hand. That looks like that passes. So I guess what we'll ask of the department is to get us some numbers county by county of what that would mean to those counties. And then for LSO to draft legislation that would take maybe you guys can talk about the buildings, just the buildings or the buildings and associated land as part of this draft bill. Is that Representative Larson?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I think that having that split out on if we just exempted the buildings versus buildings and associated land, and maybe an overall exemption on all your property.
Madam Chair, we'll be glad to put that together.
Okay.
And we do appreciate the opportunity to work with this committee because we've already provided a lot of the background on the why. And so it is very helpful for us to at least start with TRW before we go over revenue. We're glad to go there if that's where we need to go. But
okay. So Lucas, is that clear? Okay. Moving on to the next commission authority to set fees. Any discussion? Representative Storer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I realize we haven't taken any public comment on any of these financial issues, and there might be some comment at least on this one. So.
Do we have any public comment? Come on up. Richard, come up as well.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee. My name is Sabrina King, and I'm here today on behalf of the Wyoming chapter of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Broadly speaking, I think we will our membership will discuss these bill drafts as they come out, but I think generally we favor everything that's coming out so far. And I think drafting more bills and being able to have this discussion has been alluded to. I think the vast majority of hunters and anglers in the state of Wyoming want to see our game and fish department be self-sufficient. I will say on this specific issue in terms of moving the authority to raise fees away from the legislature, I think as folks probably understand, that will come, I think, with some concern from the hunting and angling community. One thing that I do just want to bring to the table is the reality that, especially for a lot of resident hunters, yes, we go out and hunt for the experience, but I think there are also a lot of folks who frankly just go out to hunt to fill the freezer. So when you are facing increased energy costs, your taxes going up, your property taxes going up, your food costs at the grocery store going up, for those folks, you know, an increased application fee and an increased license fee, that's not nothing. And I don't want to lose sight of that in the conversation. One potential opportunity that might be interesting to explore, and this came up earlier, would be looking at the legislature setting a cap for all licenses and giving Game and Fish discretion within that, which might be interesting just in terms of if there are licenses that actually need to be lowered, so that more licenses get sold. That could be an option. So potentially in terms of completely removing legislative oversight from setting license fees, which, you know, our membership will certainly discuss as we move forward in this process. One potential option might be simply to set a cap and then give the commission discretion under that to set fees as they see fit. So maybe a middle ground there that could provide some discretion for Game and Fish, but also maintain some level of legislative oversight. But otherwise, you know, we certainly support this discussion. I think we're really interested in seeing some of this move forward and figuring out all of the different pieces of how we fix this puzzle for Game and Fish.
Thank you, Ms. King. Any questions for Ms. King? No. Richard, Mr. Garrett.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Richard Garrett, and I'm sitting here today as a member of a task force that the director referenced earlier, one that Governor Meade asked to come together to discuss game and fish funding. It was the Fish and Wildlife Task Force, met from about 2015 to 2017. We made 9 recommendations. It was a diverse task force. There were members of the ag community, the hunting community, oil and gas, coal, NGOs, as the director mentioned. And I'm only here to volunteer that I'd be happy to provide you a link to that task force, those task force recommendations. There were 9. We also examined 10 other ideas for the governor's consideration and for that of the legislature to consider. The legislature took up and actually adopted, I believe, about 4 of those recommendations. But one was to task or allow the Game and Fish Commission to set license fees. Another, it's interesting to note too, was that it was our recommendation to the governor that only deferred maintenance costs be obligated by the Game and Fish Department to pay out of pocket, if you will, out of their budget, while their capital construction requirements, it was our recommendation that they be paid for through the general fund. Obviously, the sportsman, sportswoman community has stepped up and helped create this beautiful building that we're in today. So anyway, I'll be glad to provide that information. There's a lot of historic knowledge that is still relevant today, and I appreciate it. And any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Garrett. Any questions for Mr. Garrett? No. Thank you so much, and we'll look forward to seeing that report. Ms. Johnson.
Me again, Jess Johnson, Wyoming Wildlife Federation. I'll keep it relatively short because I know you guys heard me on the world-class resources and paying for it. But I think there's a lot of approaches here that are really heartening. And I would say that this seems to be something where it is, you know, what I would be, and as WWF would be happy to support any of these coming forward. And I would almost suggest doing that and having many of these ideas come forward so we can flesh out, you know, how does this trickle down? How much help is this? Do we do it as a piecemeal approach where we do, whether it's the property tax or there's little pieces that we move forward to get to where we need to go? Or do we just bite the bullet and go, we've got to increase resident license fees, or we have to increase this, or we have to give the commission the authority to do that? I think there's a lot of ways to approach this. And this is one of those instances where I think it's important that we explore all of them and we move forward and we sort of see where the sporting community is ready to be. You know, I can tell you that we have a lot of our members that support, you know, fee increases, but we hadn't thought about some of these other piecemeal approaches. So making sure we get that out to the sporting community and kind of get some of that feedback, I think is going to be very helpful. I think also, looking at commission authority makes a ton of sense because it is sportsmen in particular, because this is their dollars. Those of us that are paid to be here are here, but no one else is. You go to a commission meeting, there is a lot of citizens that show up. They're trained to be there. And it's not because it's easier access or closer, it's just they're used to being there and going there. So the commission is closer to the public when you think about it as a hunting community. Now, the greater citizenry, that is different. You guys are here and this is what you are here for. But as far as like those who are going to feel the fee increase, they are trained and used to going to the commission. So I think commission authority does make a ton of sense. I think also is like addressing whether it's a cap or not, maybe what we give is the commission the authority to deal with costs on things that are like the trophy stuff. People that are filling their freezer are filling their freezer with does, the doe fawn licenses, the cow calf, those are easier to draw. You can draw those every single year. As I was saying, I draw about 10 tags a year and I get 3 elk, 3 deer, and 3 antelope usually because I know how to use second and third choices and put a female of that species. So I either have 2 whitetail doe licenses, 2 cow elk licenses, and then hunt general for the buck or the bull, which really is, that's the experience hunt. That's where I get picky and I don't loose an arrow on the raghorn that walks in front of me. But when I have that cow license and I'm ready to fill the freezer, it's a cow license. And that's what is putting meat on people's table. So there's a difference in whether we're going for the experience and quality of the hunt or whether we're going to fill the freezer in that sense too. So there's some, give and take, but I do think that like we can do this piecemeal approach and we can make it and get it there if the commission authority has no appetite. But I really would put it to this committee that the commission is the closest to the sporting public. They are so trained to be there. And, even, dare I bring up the wolf incident, that commission, even not having authority over any of that, had 100 people there to talk. How many were in this room today? It's a very different change. And so I think there is a point to be made in that sense. And I would wholeheartedly support it. I think also from WWF, any of these approaches is a good approach. Looking at how we can be creative, it's time to kind of get to that point. And we're really here to be at the table and help pull that through and make sure that our members and the larger sporting public are sort of aware of the trickle down. Why are we doing this? Isn't just to punish you. Like, what is the point here? And so that's what we can commit to as well. And I guess I would just urge being creative and trying everything in this sense.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Any questions for Ms. Johnson? No? Mr. Minton? Okay, wait. Oh, absolutely. Sure. Yeah, Representative Angeles.
Thank you. And thank you, Jess and Ms. Johnson. I appreciate that. But one thing I'd like to mention is when we start looking at commission to set those fees, they're not elected, they're appointed. And the reason why you don't see the people here as much in this room is because they have an elected representative that they can hold accountable when they go home. So I know for me, my constituents will not be for allowing a commission to set those fees. The reason why there are so many people at the commission and they have done good work is because they're trying to make their voices heard. They don't have someone elected to represent them. So that's what I would just say. They're appointed, they're not elected, they're not as close to the people. Our jobs are on the line. So that's what I would say with that.
I would agree. I would just say that's where I urge trying every approach to sort of see what the people are feeling on that. And just seeing what the appetite is there, especially within the sporting community. I think every one of these ideas that have been brought forward, plus others that may come up, we may flesh out some really cool creative topics. And I do think that it's worth trying everything to see what the sort of feeling of the people is.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none. Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you.
Mr. Minton.
Chairman and some members of the committee, Josh Benton, Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. I'm the Wyoming Field Manager. Our mission is to guarantee all Americans quality places to hunt and fish. And as we've heard multiple times today, Wyoming is probably, I would arguably one of the best state in the lower 48 in terms of our wildlife resources. So we want to see that continued. And in order to do that, we need to make sure that our state agency has the funding it needs to get the work done. We've heard that numerous times today with things like quality of hunting, which in order to have that, we need to have We need to have healthy big game migrations. We need to have funding for wildlife crossings. That's something that our membership overwhelmingly advocates for and wants to see more of. That costs money. Angling, we've just heard about the issues with invasives, whether invasive fish or invasive mussels and other things that cost money. Habitat, we spent a lot of time talking about sheep today. If we could increase the habitat for bighorn sheep, we'd probably increase our draw odds a little bit. So let's look at making sure we have we can fund our agencies for that. And then finally, having quality staff. Last summer, we ran some public land access listening sessions across the state, and something that was consistently brought up, whether it was from public land advocates and public land hunters or members of landowners that were attending these meetings, was the importance of having red shirts on the ground. So making sure that the agency has the resources that they need to reduce the conflicts and reduce conflicts on the ground, improve access, and deal with these issues such as overpopulation in the southeast corner of the state. So echoing support for this, all of the above approach with all of these different options for funding for the agency. And I can tell you that we would be excited to engage our membership and work with a coalition of sportsmen's orgs across the state to provide you with the support that you need to do this as well. I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Minton. Any questions? No? Okay, thank you so much. Commissioner Livingston.
Madam Chair. There it goes. Madam Chair, Madam Co-Chair, members of the committee. Guess I'm sitting here wearing a couple different hats. I'm Lee Livingston, Park County Commissioner. I'm also the president of Wyoming Outfitters and Guides Association. I'm going to circle back. I'm going to put on my commissioner property taxes. I guess Game Fish just figured they ought to join the bandwagon. Something to keep in mind. I mean, everyone talks about, the property taxes going to the county, not to the state. Well, they're collected by the county. They are distributed out to all kinds of different places. The biggest one of them is education. So they're going to be taking the biggest hit on this. Some of our special districts, our weed and pest district, they're receiving I think 3 mills. So there's going to be some folks. It's not just the county. We don't get all that money. We get 12 mills that we handle within the county. Putting on my Wyoming Outfitter and Guides hat as president, when we start talking about license fee increases, I just urge caution on looking at non-residents. I wasn't here for this morning's presentation, but non-resident license sales make up a big chunk of the game fish budget, but they keep reaching into that bucket. And I just want to be cautious there. I'm starting to hear it from some of my clients that Wyoming is starting to get pricey and they're starting to look at other states. Wyoming is by far the best state for a lot of hunting of the Western states. But again, I'm starting to hear a few folks out there grumbling. I lost probably 6 clients that were booked after the last fee increase. The only way they were going to draw their license was to draw the special license, and when it went to $2,000 for an elk license, they just said you've priced this out. So I guess I'm just asking you, urging caution when you start looking at license fee increases, that we as residents have it pretty darn good in a lot of ways, and very good as when we go to buy our licenses to go hunting every year. So with that, I would stand for any questions.
Any questions for Commissioner Livingston? Thank you. What should I say, Commissioner Livingston, and then any questions for President Livingston? Okay, so any other public comment? So now I guess it's time to circle back to the commission authority to set fees. We've heard some differing comments on that. Is there any appetite to go forward with that? Representative Western.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I mean, I certainly think that there's, from a management perspective for the Department for Wildlife, there's absolutely a compelling case. It makes it easier, it's more convenient, but at the end of the day, we're delegating our authority away. And that makes me pretty nervous, because at the end of the day, I think we have to be accountable to ourselves, to sportsmen, and to the public at large in this. And so I certainly appreciate that this is a option. I certainly think delegating it to the commission is really makes me nervous. But I think just even the topic of increasing them, I certainly think that we have to be able to tell ourselves and tell sportsmen that we have exhausted every other option to meet the legitimate revenue needs of the department before we start talking about resident, so I mean, non-resident, but it's most importantly, resident license fees. So.
Any other comments? So let's once again test how the committee would like to proceed or not proceed with some sort of legislation that would give the commission authority to set fees. Representative Larson.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I'd like to make a motion to draft a bill that would allow the commission to set fees with us making a cap and leave those caps as blanks we can fill in at the next committee meeting.
Is there a second?
Madam Chairman, I'll second it.
Okay, it's seconded by Representative Singh. So any discussion by the committee? Representative Larson.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And the reason why I think this might be a good approach is just for that reason that there might be certain populations that the agency is trying to manage, and this gives them full flexibility to decrease license fees for an incentive for people to buy more licenses.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, we'll go ahead and vote. All those in favor of drafting a bill that would allow the commission to set fees within the parameters of a cap. All those in favor say aye. All those no. Let's do a raise of hands. All those aye. All those no. Okay, so that fails. Moving forward to the next thing on the agenda, application fee increase. So Director, do you want to describe that to us again?
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair. So right now it's capped in statute at $5 for residents, $15 for non-residents. This is a non-refundable fee that's used to cover the costs of processing applications, conducting the draw, all the computer, everything related to doing draws. It's pretty much that simple. Generates, as we heard from my CFO, Meredith Wood this morning, roughly $2 million from non-residents and roughly $500,000 from residents.
So how long has that dollar amount been in place? Has it been increased in recent history?
Madam Chair, that's the same fee that's been in place since application fees were initially initiated, which would have been over 15 years ago. I don't remember exactly what year. I can find out, but it's been a long time.
Okay. Any comments, questions? Chairman Schuler.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Do you have any recommendations on what do you think would be reasonable fee increase? Like a couple bucks, like going from $5 to $7.50 or to $10, or I mean, any ideas from your end of things on that?
I think the only thing I have to really tether that to is trying to evaluate inflation during that period of time. And so, I'm going to I know what the inflation's been over the last 3 years. And certainly it's higher than that. And so, somewhere in the neighborhood of a 30% increase, I think is something as a starting point that would just off the cuff. I would say, somewhere around 30%.
Representative Western.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chairman. I say this in context of just the overall issue that we're facing, and that the department is facing, that the long-term revenue projections for the department are concerning, right? That they have obligations that they have to meet, services they have to render. I think the application area is one where there might be a little more flexibility. Certainly if we allow, for example, we know that there's the non-resident application fee generates quite a bit of money for the department as is. You know, perhaps that could be an area where if we give the commission the flexibility to set that fee for non-residents. As we've heard, it's been there for quite a while and hasn't really been visited, but if we give the commission that flexibility, that could certainly give the department, the director's office, really to work with, to work with the commission to help, shorten that revenue, that budget gap. So that's certainly an idea.
Any other comments or questions? So I did the CPI calculator for, from 2005 to 2024, $5 would now be $8.19 would be the inflation adjusted amount. And I'm wondering, as we talked about going to Representative Western's comment, if we would do an up to amount in regards to application fees, if that's palatable. Director?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think that certainly works on our end. Either way will work on our end. Like I talked this morning, I view several smaller pieces to make a package to meet our need is, very doable for us. So, giving the commission the discretion, if you told them tomorrow that their cap was $30 on non-residents and $10 on residents, which is double what it is today, the commission's not going to go and set those fees at those maximum levels tomorrow. They're going to look at something that makes sense to tether it to and then take it to the public.
Any other questions, comments? So a show of hands, how many are in favor of doing some sort of legislation that would allow the commission to set the application fees up to a cap point? All in favor? Okay, so that sounds good. So we will go forward with that. Lucas, if you can maybe get with the director and you guys can figure out how that looks. Any other comments, questions? Representative Larson.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And this kind of goes into your commission considerations from earlier, the license insurance topic. Is there any statutory needs for you to implement a program like that, or are you covered on that end?
Director.
Madam Chair, Representative Larson, appreciate that question. And so we were having that discussion today at the break at lunch, and my answer right now is I don't know. When I walked in here, I thought we were in good shape, and then I thought a little bit more about it. So what I owe you is if we do have a statutory need, I will report to you by the July meeting on that need. But I think there's been some really good dialogue here on when we talked about this morning that's helpful for that.
Representative Western.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. The good gentleman of Sweetwater County kind of stealing my thunder over here. I don't know, Madam Chairwoman or Director, would it be helpful to maybe do an informal working group between now and the next meeting to help you on that, or what? How can we help you on that particular topic?
Director.
So, Madam Chair, I think we can do most of the work, but if we could bounce ideas off whoever's willing, I mean, there's certainly folks that have interest on the committee, whoever's willing before the next meeting, that would be helpful for us if we could talk to you, Representative Larson, Representative Byron, any of the folks that are interested that want to be involved in this.
So a raise of hand of who's interested in helping on this topic. Representative Larson. Well, the idea of I'm going to call it a license refund policy, not an insurance. So a license refund policy. So I have Western, Larson. Anybody else? Nope, those are your guys.
Store.
Oh, yeah. So yay, revenue. And Representative Store are willing to do that. And probably if you need to reach out to any of us, we're fine with that. Any other topics that we need to discuss? Any other public comment on any of the things we've talked about today? Hearing none, we'll talk about, Lucas, do you have any questions for what we've decided today?
I did have just one quick question, Chairman. Madam Chair, just quickly on the bill to increase application fees for licenses, it is the committee's determination to do the up to language that can be determined by the commission.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions you have, Lucas, or we good?
I don't believe so. I think the only topic is, did the committee wish to discuss anything for wolf management?
I think we'll leave that to the next meeting. And we'll have more discussion about that in the next meeting. Okay. So I guess we are done with our agenda for the day. Tomorrow morning, we'll meet at 8:30 at the Buffalo Bill State Park headquarters. If you're headed toward the west, go toward Yellowstone Park. And once you get through the tunnels, there's 3 tunnels. Then start looking for the sign that directs you to the left-hand side of the road to the state park headquarters. We'll meet there around 8:30, and then we'll get a tour of the park, explanation of the master plan process that the park's going through, and then the aquatic invasive species challenges that the reservoir is facing. Is that good? I'm getting nods from the state park guys, so that'll be good. Bring a raincoat. If you don't have a raincoat, I'll bring a couple extra from my house, just in case. Co-Chairman Schuler.
And just a reminder, we'll be back here at 1 o'clock. And so make sure you don't forget, we've got that afternoon session. It's important.
Representative Western. Did you have, okay. Anybody? Representative Burkhart?
Is it acceptable to bring our fishing gear on this tour?
You may bring your fishing gear, but you won't be fishing. So if you want to lug your fishing gear along, that would be Dan.
Please do.
I'm not telling you what to put in your truck. Okay, any other questions, comments? Then we're gonna call it a day at 3:55, 5 minutes ahead of our scheduled adjournment time.